Hello, everyone. My name is Celeste Acevedo, and today I will be talking about Chapter 1, Diversity in the United States Questions and Concepts. Um, so, this chapter is pretty much going to be examining the complexities of diversities in the United States, talking about the history and exploring key sociological concepts such as minority groups, stratification, race, and gender. It's also going to introduce some theories from influential sociologists such like Karl Marx, Max Weber, Gerald Lenski, and Patricia Hill Collins. By having a good understanding to these concepts, we can better analyze the issues related to inequalities and identities in our society. This chapter kind of gives a preface to all the other chapters that are going to be coming within this textbook, and kind of giving us a better knowledge and kind of pinpointing the problems of where and how our system has been corrupted and kind of been developed into a certain way into our society where we kind of have all these stereotypes and fit everybody into their own category. So a little kind of uh dividing of what I'm gonna be talking about. I'm gonna start off with the minority groups, and then I'm gonna then go minority groups and diversity trends, and then I will be going to the theoretical perspectives on stratification, and I will be talking about this influential people that have kind of examined and educate have been educating people about stratification and multiple theories on how they explain it. Then I will be going on to I know it's not on here, but I will be doing a quick little defining a minority group and kind of and the visible distinguished traits. And then I will go into the patterns of inequality, race, and gender, and kind of explain how those two kind of go hand in hand into how people are not equal to one another. And then I will go to section 5, prejudice and discrimination, and kind of just define these terms, key terms, and kind of further on explain every term in how it's been used in history. And then I will just end it off with the conclusion. So, a little introduction of a little quick summary of this chapter. Um, this chapter examines the complexities of diversity in the United States. It is exploring key sociological concepts such as minority groups, race, gender, and everything else that kind of goes into what we stereotype into our society now, or kind of have been normalized to or built in into doing. Um, we're gonna get into obviously the sociologists that have been studying this, and it's really important just to understand and be aware and educating on these issues that are related to inequality, so we could kind of see what and how we can change, because this is frankly unfair to those minorities and people of color, or those who may not feel like the norm. So going to our first section, which is the minority groups and diversity trends. This kind of gives a quick overview on the United States, in which it's been a long nation of immigrants, and there's been ongoing leading debates about what it means to be an quote unquote American. The demographic has shifted rapidly. So we see since the 1960s, the annual number of immigrants has tripled. By 2060, non-Hispanic whites will be a numerical minority, and Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders are among the fastest growing populations. So we see that the United States is frankly more than just a white person. There are It's a huge diversity. This country is literally known as the most diverse country because a lot of people are coming here to find a better education, better jobs, better, pretty much the American dream for what has been kind of not what is portrayed when you're actually living here and dealing with all these prejudice and segregation and all this harassment against quote unquote non Americans, which are the Hispanics, Asian Americans, and Native Americans, and every and etc. So it's kind of been a controversial debate as to if the immigrants are American, even though they do live here and are working here and kind of have been rapidly growing into our society and are kind of outweighing the numbers of what a quote unquote ideal American would be. Despite these demographic changes, conventional racial and ethnic labels remain problematic. These labels often are generalized as diverse populations. They fail to reflect individuals' self identifications and struggle to categorize mixed race individuals. The naming of groups is a social construct shaped by historical and political contexts. This section kind of the pinpoints and highlights the aspect of immigration and how people do take immigration as a way that we are trying to invade the United States or trying to come here to do bad stuff or taking over and or taking advantage of everything. But when that's not frankly true, we come here for a better place to live, and we find hope, and we find that the American dream gives everybody, immigrants, the hope that they are able to change their lives for the better. So this goes into the next section, which is the theoretical perspectives on stratification. So I will be going through each individual theorist and kind of emphasizing their main highlighted and kind of explain what their theories are. So stratification is basically the hierarchical ranking of social groups that lead to unequal access to resources. We're going to get into each theorist and explaining how their view and perspectives on stratification is. Starting off with Karl Marx, who argued that the class conflict is the driving force of societal change. He divided society into two main classes: the owners of production, who pretty much own everything and are getting that money from the product, and then the workers. According to Marx, the owners of production are exploiting the workers and creating economic inequality. He believed that capitalism would eventually collapse under its own contradictions, leading to a classless society. So, what Karl Marx is basically saying is that because there is someone in power, that this will lead to a downfall and kind of it will corrupt within itself because there's no way that it will work out since the rich are only getting richer and the poor is only getting poorer. Next up is Max Weber. So Max Weber built upon Marx's ideas, but he added his own social stratifications and identified three main components. We have wealth, which is the economic assets and resources; prestige, which is the social honor or respect associated with the person's status; and then we have power, which is the ability to influence others, often though politics or authority. Weber emphasized that people's class positions are not only determined by economic status but also their prestige and power. So Max Weber kind of built off of Marx's analysis, and he added his own dimensions as to what stratification is based on, in which we do see this play a big role because we see that those who have money and are wealthy usually come with power and already have that higher status compared to the workers. So next up is Jared, who focused on how technological advancements impacted social inequality. So he proposed that societies evolve through different stages from hunting and gathering to industrialization, and that the distribution of knowledge and technology plays a crucial role in shape shifting stratification. In more advanced societies, economic and technological progress can either reduce or reinforce inequality, depending on how resources are allocated. So, Jared pretty much explained the formation of social inequality by suggesting that the technology and knowledge are the main key factors that will determine and bring inequality, in which there's no way to turn back because we're only going further on and only improving our technology, and um, we are kind of seeing it now in society how it's playing, a big role in pretty much everyone's lives. And lastly, we have Patricia Hill. She Patricia developed the concept of intersectionality, which examines how various social identities such as race, class, gender, and sexuality all overlap and create a unique experience of oppression or privilege. She argued that oppression is not one dimensional and that different forms of inequality must be understood together. For example, a black woman experiences discrimination differently than a white woman or a black man due to their intersection of racism and sexism. So Patricia's just pretty much hitting how there could be more than one problem that can be combined and kind of like that example, produce different forms of oppression and privilege. We see this a lot nowadays in society, whether it's being a black woman that is a part of the LGBTQ plus community, or but we see how that's compared to whether it's a white woman or a white male as opposed to a black man or Hispanic. So it's kind of already having that categorization and stereotype before the intersection, and then once we see another role play in, that's when we combine them and kind of assume and make this new form of oppression. So these were kind of the four theorists that kind of had and what their perspectives were on stratification. I feel like this chapter did a really good job kind of pinpointing and dissecting each and every one. I feel like there was multiple examples that really educated me, and it was kind of interesting to read how all of this does play a part even in today's society, even though it was way back when, and how history is kind of still, if not has been getting worse and more corrupted than it was. So now I will be getting to defining a minority group. So a minority group is not necessarily a numerical minority, but rather a group that experiences systematic disadvantages. Sociologists Wagley and Harris identify five main characteristics of minority groups. I will be going to these dissecting these 5 characteristics and kind of just be talking about them. So we have number one, they experience inequality and discrimination. So minority groups are faced with barriers in education, employment, housing, and political representation. So pretty much everything in their day-to-day life. This discrimination can be both overt and systemic, embedded in institutions and laws, or kind of embedded by human nature and categorization and how it's been normalized. Historical examples include segregation, voter suppression, and employment restrictions based on race or gender. Even today, disparities in income, access to healthcare, and police interactions highlight persistent inequalities. Number two, possesses a distinguished trait. So this could be based whether it's on race, ethnicity, gender, religion, language, sexual orientation, or physical characteristics. These traits are often used as biases for social categorization and stereotyping, which can lead to prejudice and discrimination. This one's kind of plain and simple. I feel like it's in our human nature to judge someone based on all of the things I just said. And that's when we kind of make assumptions and kind of put them in that box, you know? We're already giving them that title for them. Number three, have a shared awareness of their disadvantage. So members of minority groups develop a sense of solidarity and collective identity due to shared experiences of marginalization and exclusion. This awareness can lead to social movements and activism such as civil rights movements, LGBTQ plus rights advocacy, and indigenous rights campaigns. So basically, it's just kind of like these groups already know that they're at a disadvantage, so they need to kind of create their own group and kind of have to have an activist, or not have to, but like, these groups are already aware, so they're trying to do whatever they can to protect their rights and to be able to live, well, hopefully able to live with no fear. Number four, membership is involuntary. So individuals are typically born into this minority group and cannot change their status easily or at all. This contrasts with achieved statuses, which are based off personal efforts and accomplishments. However, some groups experience shifting minority status based on social and political changes, such as immigrants who face different levels of discrimination over time. So obviously, one cannot change their skin tone. One cannot. I mean, if change it purposely in different ways, but usually it's very hard to. There's kind of distinct features that people who are from the Middle East may have more distinct features, physical features that one may already know that that's not a true quote unquote American. Just stuff like that. They already know or are kind of born into that ascribed status. And lastly, they tend to form a close knit communities and relationships. Minority groups often develop strong social networks and support systems to navigate discrimination and to preserve cultural traditions. These communities provide emotional support, economic assistance, and political advocacy. Examples include religious organizations, social justice groups that advocate for minority rights, and many more. Whether it's you know religious groups getting together, having certain silent protests, stuff like that. They usually want to come together to know that they are safe and they are protected and they have the right to be who they want to be. So this is kind of how defining a minority group. And then we have section 5 now that I will be getting into. Section 4. The patterns of inequality, race, and gender. So I have been putting up pictures, but this one's from the chapter. It's kind of, I did take it. It's the chart of black Americans having the same chances as white Americans to obtain the same level of employment. This is from 1963 to 2016. We could see a huge difference, obviously, and this can go from discrimination to even embedded in like laws and stuff like that way back when. But pretty much race and gender are the two most visible traits used to justify social hierarchies, leading to deeply entrenched patterns of inequality. So I'll be talking about race and gender and just kind of like explaining them both. So with race, there's no biological or scientific basis for racial categorization. Rather, race is a social construct developed to kind of legitimize colonization, slavery, and segregation. Throughout history, racial classifications have been used to justify discriminatory laws and policies that advantage dominant racial groups. Even today, systemic racism persists in areas such as housing, education, criminal justice, creating long term disparities in wealth and opportunity. So this been ongoing every in history. Feels like it hasn't changed. Um, we see even today in our government, it's very race is a very big issue. Um, we see that, not just in the government. We see that with law enforcement, work employment, even when you're just trying to go out for a walk and you just get, harassed for no reason, being called names, going to a neighborhood where it's more white dominant, feeling like you're the outcast, having already knowing where to go, where not to go because of your race. That's a pattern of inequality because we've been taught that. For gender, societies have historically assigned gender roles based on biological sex, reinforcing patriarchal structures that privilege men over women. Gender equality is evident in wage gaps, workplace discrimination, political underrepresentation. Women, particularly women of color, face additional challenges due to the intersection of gender and race. So that's kind of that what the chapter talked about earlier of the intersection. This is where it plays a part, and in that graph it shows, let's say even if it was a black woman, it'll probably be lower than the bottom graph, the bottom line. So that just kind of like showing how intersection really affects a person, even though they were kind of already born into that. Um, the feminist movement and LGBTQ plus activism have challenged traditional gender norms and sought greater equality for all gender identities. So that little intersection, so women of color, LGBTQ plus individuals, and gender non-conforming people face compounded discrimination due to intersecting forms of oppression. Issues such as reproductive rights, access to healthcare, and workplace equity demonstrate how race and gender shape social outcomes in complex ways. So this pattern, as we see, as it's been more and more talked about in society today, we see how that intersection is really affecting people, and how aware everyone is, becoming, and kind of fighting for that right. It's not fair that people born how they are have to be treated or kind of live in fear just because of the race and who they want to be. So that's kind of what this section of the chapter talked about. And then the last section, prejudice and discrimination. So prejudice is an attitude of, or belief about a group, often based on stereotypes. They are learned through socialization and can deeply ingrain in cultural narratives and institutional practices. So we see on to the right, I have placed a little picture. So it says prejudice, favoritism, which goes to behavior of discrimination, goes to stereotyping, and it's just a constant cycle. And that's kind of how it's been forever, as we see that it still hasn't changed and there still hasn't been a solution to this, because it's kind of built in our human nature since forever ago. So discrimination is the actions or behaviors that result from prejudice, which can occur on individual and institutional levels. Discrimination can take many forms, including hiring biases, wage gaps, racial profiling, exclusion from political participation. We barely have been seen in the political stance people of color and even women. So it's been so long until now, and even now they're getting hate for just being a person of color or a woman. Um, so while explicit racism has declined, systemic discrimination persists and barriers continue to disadvantage marginalized communities. Even when laws prohibit discrimination, disparities remain due to historical inequalities and unconscious biases. So this unconscious bias is pretty much our human nature telling us or kind of categorizing everybody into their own bubble. Um, so this occurs when society systems such as legal, economic, and educational institutions perpetuate inequality. Some examples are redlining and housing policies, disparities in school fundings, sentencing disparities in the criminal justice system. These institution barriers make it difficult for minority groups to access the same opportunities as dominant groups. So we all know the dominant groups, the white male. It's crazy how they're able to get away with a lot of stuff, or even get away with it completely, as opposed to even if a minority were to have done it, they'll probably get triple the, let's say, the sentence, or they'll be quick to hop on to target them. Um, so microaggressions is subtle, often unintentional, discriminatory remarks or behaviors that reinforce stereotypes and contribute to an unwelcoming environment for marginalized individuals. These can accumulate over time, which this micro is now turned to a huge, negatively impacting one's mental health or social mobility. Um, so this is just an ongoing repeat cycle of prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping everybody. Um, whether the laws prohibit it or not, it's the human nature, unfortunately, and um, it's been hard to find justice for those that have been, affected by this, because it's everywhere, Um, as a way to conclude on this chapter, it really was, a lot to read and understand and get a grasp, because I am a minority. I do face this day to day, and it sucks because I'm already used to it. But why should one be used to all the in to live in fear, used to protecting yourself, or protect looking out for your family, your friends, when that's not how one should live their life. It's important to understand the diversity in the U.S., as it requires recognizing the historical and social processes that shape groups' identities and inequalities. By critically engaging with these issues, we can challenge discrimination, we can promote inclusion, and work towards a more equitable society. Obviously, we can't change this overnight, or we probably can never, will ever be 100%, perfect, but we could work towards moving into a better society, where it shouldn't be in our human nature to, follow that cycle and repeat it. But thank you guys for listening. I look forward, to discussing and reading more of these chapters, and I really appreciate you listening. So thank you.